discretion advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
On the 28th of January, 1971, Dana Ewell was born to two highly successful parents. His father, Dale Ewell, had become a multi-millionaire through aircraft sales after leaving the U.S. Air Force, and the two Ewell children grew up surrounded by privilege, although the family preferred not to flaunt their wealth. On Easter weekend, 1992, 21-year-old Dana was away from the family to visit his girlfriend. On Sunday, the 19th of April, his parents and his sister, 24-year-old Tiffany, had just arrived back in Fresno after spending the weekend at a beach house they owned in Pajaro Dunes. Tiffany and her mother, Glee Ewell, had driven back, but Dale decided to fly home in his own plane. On Tuesday, April 21st, Dana contacted some friends of the family, expressing concern that he had not heard from his parents in 2 days, and that nobody had responded when he tried to reach out. At the Ewell family home, police discovered the reason that nobody had heard from Dale, Glee, and Tiffany since Sunday. All three of them had been shot to death on Sunday evening. The homicide detectives assigned to the case were Chris Curtis and John Souza of the Fresno County Sheriff's Office, and they spent 4 days at the crime scene. Early into the investigation, the detectives were sure of one thing: the triple homicide had not been a spontaneous act of violence. There was also evidence that it had been meticulously planned by somebody who was determined not to leave anybody in the house alive. The Ewells had been shot one by one, and each of the shell casings had been carefully picked up after the gun was fired. The killer had very good aim. While Glee was shot 4 times, Dale and Tiffany each had only been shot once. Detective Souza had seen many burglary homicides in his time, and despite the Ewell family wealth, he came to believe that the motivation for the crimes was not burglary. Even though the house was in disarray, making it appear that somebody had been looking for things to steal, nothing of value had actually been taken. According to Detective Souza, this appeared to be part of the killer's plan, making it look like a burglary gone wrong in order to obscure the real motive for the murders. That left detectives with a key question to answer. If the crime wasn't financially motivated, what was the killer's real motive, and why had they tried so hard to hide it? With no clues about the identity of the killer, they investigated the history of each member of the Ewell family, searching for anything that might have led to their deaths. During the deep dive into Dale Ewell's life, they discovered that his path to success had not been as simple as the Fresno community believed. 2 decades ago, shortly after leaving the Air Force, Dale had started out selling airplanes for a man who had later been convicted of drug smuggling. Once his boss was arrested, Dale took over the business, and his airplane selling empire began. However, the detectives did not find any indication that there were any connections between Dale's previous employer and his death. One by one, the detectives eliminated every person who might have a motive for wanting the family dead. In the end, they only had one suspect remaining: 21-year-old Dana Ewell. Even though Dana had been with his girlfriend in San Francisco during the time when his family had been killed, Detective Souza and Detective Curtis were suspicious about his behavior both before and after the crime. Unlike his sister Tiffany, who was down to earth, Dana had always had an unusual fixation on money. He didn't want to be the son of wealthy, successful parents. He wanted other people to perceive him as being wealthy and successful in his own right. When he started studying finance at Santa Clara University, he viewed his college career like a fresh start. He began telling people that he had earned millions as an entrepreneur, taking his own father's story and pretending that he had been the one to earn that money, claiming to be a stock market whiz. Plenty of people believed him, He even had a story printed in the SCU newspaper which described him as a self-made millionaire. Eventually, the lies that Dana was telling at college trickled back to his family. In response, Dale Ewell decided to change the plan for his estate and decided that he would be cutting Dana off financially after he graduated from college in the summer. Dana had always boasted that he would be a millionaire in his own right by his 25th birthday. But realistically, at the age of 21, he was still living at home with his parents, using the family money for everything. After finding out that he was the only surviving member of his immediate family, Dana didn't appear to be stricken by grief. Instead, he was mostly focused on the contents of his parents' wills. He had already known that his father would stop paying for his expenses after college. That wasn't a secret. However, Dana didn't know that his parents had also created a trust for him. His expenses would be paid by a trustee throughout his early 20s, and he would receive some dividends during his late 20s, but he would not have immediate access to their estates. Once Dana was informed that he would not be able to benefit from the bulk of the Ewell family wealth for another 10 years, he was unable to hide his anger and shock. From the earliest days of the investigation, Detective Curtis had suspected Dana. He'd been the one responsible for taking Dana through the crime scene for the first time, and immediately noticed that Dana's reactions weren't normal. Later, the detective summarized the experience, saying that he'd looked at 21-year-old Dana and thought, "That kid's dirty." But Dana wasn't the only one that investigators didn't trust. They couldn't deny that he had an airtight alibi, and that there was only one way he could have killed his family: getting somebody else to do it for him. As it happened, Dana did have one friend who might have been willing to kill for him: Joel Radokovich, a college dropout who had a reputation for being obsessed with explosives and firearms. The suspicion about Dana and Joel was fueled by their decision to start living in the Ewell home together less than a month after the murders there, even using cash to buy themselves helicopter flying lessons. Throughout this time, Dana and Joel made the unusual decision to only communicate with each other by using payphones and pagers, as if they were paranoid that somebody would overhear them talking. For months, investigators watched the pair closely, trying to monitor their communications. One day, an undercover detective recorded one of Joel's payphone conversations with Dana, where he told him, quote, "They don't have evidence. They will try to catch you in a lie." Forensics revealed that the firearm used to shoot the Ewells was a 9mm high-end rifle. One of these specialty rifles had been purchased by one of Joel Radokovich's family friends only a couple of weeks before the Ewells were murdered. The friend, Ernest Ponce, admitted to police that he'd bought the rifle and given it to Joel, but insisted that he had no idea that Joel planned to kill someone with it. On the 2nd of March 1995, both Dana and Joel were arrested, and Ernest Ponce was granted immunity as long as he agreed to testify against his friends. Ernest did end up testifying at the 8-month-long trial, but the jury ultimately decided that he wasn't a reliable witness, and they believed that he had been more involved in the crimes than he was willing to admit to. After almost 2 weeks of deliberation, the jury found both Dana and Joel guilty of 3 counts of murder in the first degree, as well as an aggravating circumstance that meant that they were eligible for a stricter sentence. One of these factors was that the murders had been convicted by a killer who lay in wait for the family to arrive home, showing exactly how premeditated it had been. Both men were sentenced to life in prison without parole. Out of the 3 victims, Detective Curtis believed that only one of them had caught sight of the killer. Dale and Tiffany had both been killed by a single shot, but Glee had been shot 4 times, several of the shots at close range while the killer was straddling her. Glee had met Joel several times before when he had come to the house and knew that he was one of Dana's closest friends. Quote, "I'm sure she saw who it was," said one of the prosecutors at the trial. "She knew her son was murdering her." That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen. If you're brand new to listening, welcome. Super pumped that you're here. Make sure you hit subscribe before you go, and it'll more easily help you catch up on back episodes, as well as not miss any of the new episodes. Speaking of new, on the next episode, we're going to jump back into serial killers. We're going to talk about one that you may have heard of, the weepy-voiced killer, Paul Michael Stefani. And the reason they called him the weepy-voiced killer is because he would anonymously report his own crimes and use this weird, weepy-sounding voice. It was like he was crying. And all of this took place in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So that's coming up on the next episode of 10-Minute Murder, so make sure you do not miss it. If you're not subscribed, do that now. If you like this episode, leave a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, Audible, any place that's possible. Your positive feedback helps the show grow so much. For all things related to 10-Minute Murder, you can go to 10minutemurder.com. That's it. That's today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to another 10-Minute Murder podcast. I will see you on the next one.